The fluorescent lights of Reagan National Airport buzzed faintly overhead, casting a sterile glow across Gate 8A. Outside, the pre-dawn sky bled from charcoal to muted blue, while jet engines rumbled like distant thunder across the tarmac. Inside, the terminal was a living pulse, heels clicking, coffee machines hissing, boarding announcements slicing the air in clipped monotones. And in the center of it all, Elijah Warner moved with the kind of quiet authority that turned heads without trying. A tailored charcoal three-piece suit skimmed his tall frame, and a slim black briefcase hung from his hand like an extension of his will. He wasn't rushing, he wasn't distracted, he was focused, because when you're the founder of a $310 million company, you don't move for the world. The world moves for you. Or at least, it's supposed to. The second Elijah stepped into the first elite cabin of Dominion Air Flight 274, the air shifted. Not just the weight of recycled air and soft leather seats, but something colder, invisible, heavy. A shadow fell across him before he could even buckle his seatbelt. A saccharine voice dripped down from above. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to relocate." Polite on the surface, icy underneath. No question, no conversation, no respect. Only the assumption that he didn't belong, even with a $12,700 ticket and a Diamond Royale membership card tucked into his breast pocket. They didn't know the man they were trying to erase was holding the power to freeze $150 million of Dominion Air's future in the palm of his hand. And they were about to find out. The question wasn't whether Elijah would stand his ground. The real question was, how many careers would be buried by the time his plane touched down? The hum of the airport was a living thing. Luggage wheels skimming polished tile, baristas shouting over milk steamers, jet engines coughing to life beyond wide glass windows. Reagan National pulsed with pre-dawn urgency, a hive of business suits and Bluetooth calls, all moving too fast to notice the quiet storm stepping through Gate 8A. Elijah Warner didn't rush. He glided, every step measured, deliberate, the soft thud of his hand-stitched Oxfords swallowed by the chaotic heartbeat of the terminal. A tailored three-piece suit clung to his tall, athletic frame, dark as a storm cloud against the sterile lighting. In his right hand, a black leather briefcase swung low, casual yet commanding, like a weapon only he knew how to wield. First elite boarding. Gate agents smiled, nodded, scanned tickets, until Elijah. The smile faltered, just slightly, on the face of the woman holding the scanner. A 2-second flicker of uncertainty. Her eyes dipped to his skin before lifting back to his boarding pass. No words, no welcome, just a brittle thank you as she handed it back without looking him in the eye. He noticed. Of course he noticed, but he said nothing. He had long since learned, silence cuts deeper than confrontation. The tunnel to the aircraft smelled of jet fuel and recycled air. Inside the cabin, luxury unfolded like a promise. Plush leather seats, champagne chilling in glass flutes, ambient lighting tuned to a soft, reassuring gold. This was the domain of power, whispered wealth, unspoken privilege. Seat 1A waited at the front corner, angled perfectly for privacy and control. Elijah placed his briefcase gently beneath the seat, shrugged off his overcoat with the ease of a man who belonged in rooms few ever entered, and fewer stayed. He had barely fastened his seatbelt when he heard it. The click, click, click of high heels against the cabin floor, slicing through the quiet like a scalpel. He looked up. Kelsey McAdams, first-class purser, all crisp navy blue and polished teeth, her name badge gleaming under the soft lights. "Sir," she said, voice coated in artificial sweetness, "this seat is actually reserved for a Platinum Legacy client. I'm going to need you to relocate." No greeting, no verification, just removal. Elijah blinked once, slowly, as if absorbing the absurdity molecule by molecule. He pulled out his boarding pass without a word, presenting it like evidence at a trial he hadn't agreed to attend. Diamond Royale member, $12,700 ticket. Confirmed seat 1A. Kelsey took the ticket. Her smile stiffened. She read it. She hesitated. She didn't apologize. Instead, her voice dipped into something softer, almost patronizing. "It's just, Mr. Carrington usually sits here. We try to accommodate our long-standing guests." Elijah's voice was ice over velvet. "I understand, but preferences don't override paid reservations, do they?" The purser's jaw tightened. A beat of silence cracked between them. Across the aisle, a few heads lifted. Curious, cautious. The air inside First Elite wasn't soft anymore. It vibrated, like the seconds before a storm breaks loose. And somewhere, deep in Elijah's chest, a quiet fuse sparked to life. The weight of the cabin seemed to shift, like a room subtly tilting on its axis. Passengers who moments ago were lost in phones and newspapers now stole sideways glances, sensing tension, tasting it. Still, no one spoke. Not yet. Elijah stayed seated, deliberate, grounded. Across the aisle, a man approached with the easy swagger of inherited privilege. Preston Carrington IV. White hair, linen suit, and a Rolex glinting under the soft cabin lights. His polished loafers made no sound on the plush carpet, but his entitlement crashed through the silence like a dropped tray. "There he is," Carrington chuckled, not to Elijah, but to Kelsey. "Still warming my seat." The way he said it, my seat, wasn't careless. It was doctrine, a belief as old as the systems that built cabins like this one. Elijah shifted slightly, just enough to register Carrington's presence, but not enough to concede an inch. Kelsey plastered on a strained smile, voice tight. "We're just resolving the matter, Mr. Carrington. One moment." Carrington leaned down, so close Elijah could smell the faint musk of expensive cologne. "Son," he said with the patronizing calm of a man convinced he was being reasonable, "I've sat in this seat every Tuesday for the past 6 years. You can understand why it's practically mine." Elijah's eyes didn't flinch. He spoke with a surgical precision that cut deeper than volume ever could. "Practically," he echoed, "but not actually." Carrington's smile slipped, a crack spidering across a facade that had likely never been challenged at 30,000 feet. Behind them, whispers flickered like brush fires. Kelsey stepped forward, tension bleeding into her perfect posture. "Sir," she said, voice now edged with steel, "we'd appreciate your cooperation. We can reseat you in 3C. Still first class, still aisle access." Elijah unfolded his hands, his voice as composed as a verdict. "I paid for 1A. I intend to keep 1A." The words dropped into the space between them, too heavy to be ignored. Kelsey hesitated, the script in her head faltering. From somewhere deeper in the cabin, another flight attendant disappeared through the service curtain, no doubt fetching backup. Within moments, Brent Halverson appeared. Cabin supervisor. A man built for confrontation, tall, pressed uniform, jaw locked in neutral professionalism. "Good morning, sir," Brent said, crouching slightly to Elijah's eye level like addressing a volatile passenger. "I understand there's a seating issue." Elijah handed him the boarding pass without a word. Brent's eyes flicked down. Diamond Royale member. Full fare. Confirmed. The corners of Brent's mouth tightened. "We do sometimes make adjustments," he said carefully, "to accommodate our long-standing legacy clients. Just an operational smoothness thing." Elijah leaned back, calm but unyielding. "Operational smoothness isn't my problem. I have a paid reservation. I'm staying." Brent straightened, clearing his throat. "I see. I'll consult with management." He retreated, Kelsey trailing behind him, throwing one last brittle glance over her shoulder. Carrington stood hovering over Elijah for a beat longer, exhaling a sharp, disappointed breath, then finally slunk 2 rows back to murmur with another passenger. The air in First Elite had changed. The luxury was still there, the leather seats, the champagne, but the illusion of fairness had been ripped away. And Elijah Warner? He wasn't moving. Not for comfort, not for protocol, and definitely not for anyone's legacy but his own. The minutes dragged like hours. Elijah sat motionless in seat 1A, the hum of the cabin vibrating beneath his shoes, the tension stitched invisibly into the air. Every now and then, a passenger would sneak a glance, then quickly look away, pretending they hadn't seen anything at all. When Brent Halverson returned, he wasn't alone. 2 uniformed security officers flanked him, their expressions clipped and unreadable. The message was clear. It was no longer a request. It was an order. "Sir," Brent said, voice tight, "we need you to come with us. There's been a discrepancy with your ticket that we must resolve immediately." The cabin froze. Someone dropped a magazine. A glass clinked against a tray. But no one spoke. No one questioned. Elijah stood slowly, measured, unflinching. He retrieved his briefcase, brushed an invisible speck off his cuff, and followed them up the aisle, through a gauntlet of averted eyes and uncomfortable silence. Every step down the jet bridge felt colder, sharper, like he was walking out of one world and into another. Gone was the velvet carpeting, the warm lighting, the whispered deference. Ahead waited the grey, utilitarian underbelly of Dominion Air. Concrete floors, fluorescent buzz, metal doors clicking shut. They led him through a side corridor marked "Authorized Personnel Only," past racks of cleaning supplies and carts loaded with half-eaten meals. It smelled of bleach and jet fuel and something sourer, like regret. At the end of the hallway stood Paul Sterling, a man with the practiced stiffness of someone who had spent too many years weaponizing procedure. His navy blazer was too tight around the shoulders, his smile even tighter. "Mr. Warner," Paul said, not offering a handshake, "please have a seat." The room was no bigger than a broom closet, metal table, 2 plastic chairs, and a single security camera blinking red in the corner. Elijah didn't sit. He placed his briefcase calmly on the table, opened it, and removed a leather folio. Inside, proof, payment receipts, corporate authorization letters, bank confirmations. He slid them across the table with the precision of a man laying out ammunition. Paul didn't even glance at them. He clicked through a tablet instead, fingers tapping without urgency. "We flagged your ticket for verification," Paul said. "High-value fares like this sometimes trigger fraud alerts. Standard procedure." "Standard?" Elijah asked quietly. Paul shrugged. "Sometimes stolen cards are used to book First Elite." Elijah studied him for a long, still second. "And what exactly about me suggested fraud?" Paul stiffened, caught, but covered it with a bureaucratic shrug. "Just protocol, sir. Nothing personal." Nothing personal. That phrase, Elijah thought, was the oldest lie in the book. Paul pressed a button. A printer buzzed to life, spitting out a thin slip of paper, a reassignment notice. "You'll be reseated shortly. Thank you for your cooperation." Cooperation, as if he had been given a choice. Elijah picked up his folio, tucked it neatly under his arm, and turned without a word. The humiliation wasn't the loud kind, the yelling, the threats, the outright slurs. It was quieter, colder, more poisonous, and it wasn't over yet. Not by a long shot. The junior gate agent didn't look him in the eye. She simply scanned Elijah's boarding pass with a quick, impersonal beep, mumbled, "You're all set," and motioned toward a staircase leading outside. Not the sleek jet bridge he had used before. This time, Elijah would be boarding through the rear cargo stairs, like freight. The morning air was sharp, laced with the burn of jet fuel and the electric tang of coming rain. The aluminum stairs clattered underfoot as Elijah climbed them, the thin metal shuddering with every step. Above him, the tail of the plane loomed indifferent. When he stepped through the rear hatch, the shift was instant and brutal. Gone was the hushed luxury of First Elite. Here, the air was thick with the scent of overpacked humanity. Coffee, cologne, crying infants. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting everyone in the sickly pallor of exhaustion. A flight attendant with a clipboard intercepted him before he could blink. "Seat 42E," she said flatly without apology. "Rear cabin, right side." No aisle seat, no window, no dignity. Elijah moved down the cramped aisle, dodging elbows and overstuffed backpacks. Overhead bins snapped open and shut. Kids shrieked. Someone sneezed wetly into the air. Row 42 was a tight prison at the back of the plane. In the middle seat, his seat, a strip of cracked faux leather waited between 2 oversized passengers. One man was already sweating through a tank top, his bulk pressing shamelessly into Elijah's space. The other munched loudly on corn chips, crumbs scattered like landmines across his tray table. Elijah inhaled once, slowly, then folded himself into the seat without complaint, knees wedged against the back of 41F, shoulders boxed in by strangers who didn't notice or didn't care. No one offered a second glance. In their eyes, he was just another economy-class nobody. A voice, too chipper to be real, chimed from the galley. "Headphones?" said Tracy Delane, an economy crew member whose pink blush was smeared unevenly across her cheekbones. She handed him a battered pair of airline headphones, cracked, frayed, the foam barely clinging to the earpieces. "Might not be fancy," she said with a wry grin, "but it's good enough back here. You're probably used to it." She winked and disappeared before Elijah could respond. He stared down at the broken headphones lying like an insult on his tray table. He didn't touch them. Instead, he reached into his briefcase and pulled out a slim black notebook. He clicked a pen open with a soft snap and began to write. Clean, surgical lines across the page. Same plane, different world. This seat isn't an insult, it's the mirror. The engines rumbled beneath his feet. The cabin lights dimmed for takeoff. Elijah closed the notebook carefully. He wasn't angry, not yet. He was calculating. Because the real turbulence, the one that would shake Dominion Air to its foundations, hadn't even begun. And Elijah Warner wasn't done flying, not by a long shot. The engines thundered as the plane clawed into the sky, punching through a low ceiling of storm clouds. Inside, the cabin buzzed with muted conversation, the clink of plastic cups, the occasional rustle of magazines being turned. But in row 42, Elijah sat perfectly still, hands folded neatly over his briefcase, eyes fixed on the seatback in front of him. He wasn't here for comfort, he wasn't here for service. He was here to listen, to watch, to document. The seatbelt sign chimed off. Passengers shuffled to the aisles, stretching cramped limbs. Overhead bins snapped open with angry jerks. The smell of reheated meals began to seep into the air. From the galley, Tracy Delane reappeared, pushing the meal cart with mechanical efficiency. Her smile was gone now, replaced with a thin, perfunctory line. When she reached row 42, she didn't make eye contact. Just set down the tray like a delivery for someone invisible. "Special meal," she muttered under her breath. Elijah pulled the tray closer. A sealed plastic lid covered the entree, condensation fogging the edges. And then he saw it. 5 words, handwritten in bold, angry red marker across the top of the meal seal. African American Special, sensitive case. The letters looked almost casual, as if scrawled during a coffee break, as if marking a man's dignity was no heavier than labeling a suitcase. Elijah stared at it for a long moment, not blinking, not breathing. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a message, a reminder that no matter what seat he bought, no matter what title he held, they had already decided who he was. The worst part wasn't the words themselves. It was the ease with which someone had written them. The casual cruelty, the confident assumption that no one would notice, or worse, that no one would care. Elijah didn't react outwardly. Instead, he pulled out his phone, silent, efficient, and snapped a photo. One picture, perfectly framed. Evidence, not vengeance, strategy. He tapped the call button above his seat. A muted chime echoed down the aisle. Tracy returned, her posture stiffening the moment she saw what he was holding. "Yes, sir," she said, voice brittle. Elijah didn't raise his voice, didn't accuse. He simply rotated the tray, letting her read the handwriting for herself. Her face paled. It must be a galley note. Inventory control sometimes labels special meals," she stammered. "Do they usually label passengers by race?" Elijah asked, voice razor-sharp but calm. Tracy's mouth opened, then closed. She stepped back, mumbling about checking with the lead purser, and disappeared like a ghost into the forward cabin. The man in the window seat beside Elijah leaned in, whispering, "Man, I'm sure they didn't mean anything by it." Elijah didn't answer, didn't even glance at him, because he knew now this wasn't just about one person or one mistake. It was systemic, and every second that passed was stacking evidence higher and higher. The plane cut through the clouds, rising toward cruising altitude. But Elijah Warner's storm was just beginning to gather. The wheels screeched against the runway with a sharp, jarring thud. Dominion Air Flight 274 coasted to a stop under a bruised gray Los Angeles sky. Inside, passengers unbuckled in a frenzy, fighting for overhead bins, clawing for cell service. But Elijah remained seated, still, focused, waiting. When the line thinned and the cabin was half empty, he rose, adjusting his cuffs with the unhurried grace of a man who knew exactly what he was about to do. A junior flight attendant at the rear hatch scanned his boarding pass one last time with a mechanical, "Thank you for flying Dominion Air," but her eyes didn't meet his. She didn't know the fuse had already been lit. 30 miles away, inside Dominion Holdings' glass-wrapped headquarters in downtown Los Angeles, the air shifted. Bryce Langston, CEO of Dominion Air, stood before a conference table littered with quarterly projections and route expansion maps. He was halfway through a tepid pitch to investors when his encrypted company phone buzzed against the polished wood. "Crisis tier alert." He frowned, stepped away from the table, and answered. The voice on the other end was tight, almost breathless. "Sir, Flight 274 incident confirmed. Elijah Warner forcibly removed from seat 1A. Incident filmed by passengers. Tray labeling incident verified. Photo evidence circulating internally." Bryce's hand gripped the phone harder. "Elijah Warner," he repeated, voice dropping an octave. "Yes, sir. Warner Dynamics, Executive Chairman, 27.8% controlling interest in Dominion Holdings." The blood drained from Bryce's face. "He owns us," he whispered. The voice on the line didn't argue. "He's already contacted legal. Audit is requesting a review of all senior staff. We're flagging personnel involved for immediate suspension." The line went dead. Bryce turned back toward the boardroom. Investors watched him, sensing the shift without understanding it yet. In less than 5 minutes, Dominion Air's internal security systems began locking out key personnel. Access cards were deactivated. Company phones flashed with urgent notifications. Effective immediately, you are placed under administrative suspension pending ethics review. At the airport, Kelsey McAdams received her notice while still unloading service cards. She stared at the black screen of her work-issued tablet, disbelief hollowing her chest. Paul Sterling's phone buzzed as he pulled into the company garage, only to find his parking badge denied, the barrier flashing red. He slammed the steering wheel, cursing under his breath. Brent Halverson's access to internal systems was severed mid-email. His computer screen faded to black, replaced with a single brutal message: "Compliance holds. Pending termination review." At Dominion's Crisis Command Center, a war room sprang to life. Legal counsel, public relations, investor relations. They weren't planning the next business quarter anymore. They were trying to survive the next 24 hours. And sitting calmly in the back of a Blacktown car, weaving through LA traffic, Elijah Warner scrolled through the growing storm with steady fingers, capturing headlines, saving screenshots. He wasn't smiling, he was calculating. Because this wasn't revenge, it was education. And Dominion Air was about to learn a lesson they would never forget. By noon, the emails hit. Across Dominion Air's sprawling offices, from downtown Los Angeles to satellite hubs in Chicago, Atlanta, and Dallas, screens flashed the same cold, merciless notice. Subject immediate suspension, pending ethics investigation. Effective immediately. Phones rang, access badges failed, laptops went dark. The silence inside Dominion's 38th floor executive wing was deafening. Assistants froze mid-keystroke. Department heads whispered in hallways, glancing over their shoulders as if betrayal itself might walk through the door. The first to fall was Kelsey McAdams. Security met her at the crew lounge, politely but firmly escorting her out. Her face flushed deep crimson as colleagues watched without speaking, without helping. Her 21-year career ended with a single swipe of a deactivated ID badge. Paul Sterling tried to fight back. In a glass-walled meeting room, he raged against HR officials, waving copies of his incident reports like a man trying to stop a tidal wave with paper. "I followed protocol," he barked. "This wasn't racism, it was procedure." But procedure didn't explain the handwritten note, or the forced removal, or the casual contempt baked into every step of the humiliation. Behind the mirrored conference glass, executives in tailored suits watched him unravel. Not judging, just calculating the size of the check it would take to erase him. Meanwhile, Brent Halverson sat alone in the cafeteria, his corporate laptop locked out mid-bite of a turkey sandwich. Around him, conversations died like flickering lights. No one sat with him, no one asked questions, he didn't need answers, he already knew. Across internal Slack channels, screenshots of the African American special meal label circulated like wildfire. Employees, once silent, now whispered about past incidents, about the jokes during onboarding, the glances during premium passenger checks, the quiet nods when certain undesirable passengers were made to wait longer, checked twice, or moved quietly to worse seats. The storm Elijah Warner had triggered wasn't just about one incident. It was a spotlight cutting through years of rot. At 2:30 p.m., Dominion Holdings issued an emergency statement. Dominion Air does not tolerate discrimination in any form. An immediate internal review is underway. Senior staff involved have been placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of a third-party investigation. Investors weren't reassured. Stock tickers began to slide, bleeding red across financial networks. Reporters camped outside Dominion's headquarters, cameras poised, ready to feast. Inside the boardroom, Bryce Langston faced the inevitable. He knew he wasn't simply fighting for Dominion Air's reputation anymore. He was fighting for its survival, and as he stared at the thick dossier Elijah Warner had personally delivered to legal, complete with time-stamped photographs, sworn witness accounts, and a detailed restructuring proposal, Bryce realized something brutal. This wasn't a negotiation. This was a reckoning. The next morning, the sun rose over Los Angeles like nothing had happened. Birds cut lazy arcs over downtown skyscrapers, traffic thickened along the freeways, and news vans crowded outside Dominion Holdings' glass facade like vultures circling a wounded animal. Inside the 39th floor executive conference room, Elijah Warner sat at the head of the table. No suit jacket, no entourage. Just him, calm, composed, and in complete control. Around him, Dominion's top brass, what was left of them, fidgeted in their seats, avoiding eye contact. Files sat unopened before them. They already knew the contents. They already knew the outcome. Elijah clicked a small remote. On the screen behind him, two images appeared side by side. One, the tray label, African American Special. Sensitive case, captured forever in a single damning photograph. The other, a video freeze frame of his quiet removal from seat 1A, his dignity intact even as others stripped it from him. The room held its breath. This, Elijah said, his voice low but cutting, is not a PR crisis. It's a cultural revelation. It's who you are when no one's watching. No shouting, no grandstanding, just the steady gravity of a man who had turned humiliation into a weapon and aimed it straight at the heart of an empire. You didn't fail because you made a mistake, he continued. You failed because you believed people like me didn't belong at this table, didn't belong in seat 1A, didn't belong in first class, didn't belong at the top. He let the words settle, sharp as glass on tile. Then, with terrifying calm, he laid out the next steps. Immediate termination of all staff involved. Mandatory anti-bias training for every Dominion employee, from the boardroom to the baggage handlers. A permanent restructuring of Dominion's leadership pipeline to elevate marginalized voices long ignored. A public acknowledgement, not an apology, but an admission of what had happened and why. And, Elijah said, his voice softening just enough to make the blow sharper, a $150 million budget freeze until these measures are not just promised, but proven. Around the table, faces paled. Careers built on handshakes and golf course deals crumbled in real time. The same executives who once nodded along to polished diversity slogans now sat paralyzed, staring at a man they had tried to minimize, and who now held the company's future between two steady hands. Because real power, Elijah knew, never needed to shout. Real power didn't perform for cameras. It didn't demand validation. It simply acted. Quietly, relentlessly, permanently. As Elijah rose from his chair, the city glittered beyond the glass, 1,000 stories unfolding at once. He didn't linger. He didn't gloat. He simply gathered his briefcase, buttoned his jacket, and walked out the door, leaving behind not just a reckoning, but a blueprint. A reminder that true change doesn't roar, it resonates. And when dignity moves, entire empires tremble. If this story stirred something in you, anger, pride, hope, then you already understand. Power isn't measured by how loudly you demand a seat. It's measured by how you rebuild the table afterward. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop your thoughts in the comments. There's more where this came from. Real stories, real lessons, real change.